Parents, welcome to another episode of The Journey, a podcast intended to educate, equip, and entertain you as we talk about important issues facing our families. PCA is a Christ-centered, biblically based, and family-focused community of committed believers doing life together. We hope the information you hear on this podcast informs and inspires you to be a better parent. Welcome to The Journey.
Parents, welcome back to The Journey. Dan Panetti. Got a couple of guests from Arizona Christian University. So glad you guys are here in town. Very excited because President Munsil, Dr. Green, you guys have written a book that really resonated with me in what I do here at PCA because our schools are kind of like sister schools in terms of what we're trying to produce. Godly young men and women who know the Lord, who love the Lord, and who seek to make a difference in their culture for the cause of Christ. Amen. And so it's kind of a neat thing. Dr. Munsil, I've actually known about you for about 30 years because we had similar paths back in the day when we were kind of fighting the good fight in the culture, and somehow God drug both of us into the educational world, you at the higher education, me here at the secondary part. But there's a book that you wrote. It's called Transforming Culture with Truth. And I wanted to kind of dive into this a little bit and find out more about what you're doing at Arizona Christian University. But let's first let our parents get to know you. So tell our parents a little bit about who you are and kind of why you're here maybe even today.
Well, thanks, Dan. And you're right. We have intersected over 3 decades, I think, going back to...
we started when we were young.
We were very young.
Very young back in the day.
Not so young anymore. But... So my background, like yours, is as an attorney that was working on public policy issues on behalf of life and religious liberty and marriage, and sort of, I feel like most of my career was trying to think biblically about how to engage with public policy. Right. What are the right policies for governing people according to the teachings of Scripture? And I talked about how it was always amazing to me that people thought that Scripture had something to say about every aspect of human existence except the political arena,
right?
Because that's too ugly, nasty, negative.
Let's try to keep our faith separate from our politics,
right? Which is great because then you end up with a bunch of people who don't have any of that, writing the laws for a nation or a state. So Christian engagement, being salt and light, is kind of my background. And then I sort of accidentally fell into this role. I was on the board of a small Bible college that was frankly, struggling to survive and questioning, does it have a reason to even be there anymore? And I had served on its board, and at a moment when the previous president left, I was asked to step in as an interim president. And so I committed 2 years to that, and I'm starting my 14th year. So you can see how that went.
Be careful what you say yes to.
I'm not, unlike Dr. Green and my wife, Dr. Tracy Munsil, who I know we'll talk about later, I'm not an academic. I come out of sort of the Christian conservative activist mode. And I warned the board, or told the board, I said, if you ask me to do this, I would like to see an institution that's committed to Christian cultural engagement, and not just in the government area, but in all of human existence. And so one of the first things you mentioned, the book, Transforming Culture with Truth, that's actually the vision of Arizona Christian University. When I came to the school, the tagline was intentionally Christian.
I love it.
And that was good as it spoke to us, but I wanted a vision that spoke to the influence that Christians should have on the world that was outwardly focused. And so we
part
transitioned.
Of that is the whole idea that a college, right? We kind of call it the ivory tower. We sit here and we talk about how bad the world is, and we study it and we look at it from a Christian perspective. The whole idea, right? When Jesus came, right, he ministered to people.
Yes.
Right? He healed people. Right, he was in and amongst people. Right, I mean, people are the product. Right?
People are the product, and so the mission. How do we help people flourish?
Yes.
And it's walking with God and learning how to think and live your life according to biblical standards. And so like I said, and I want to let Dr. Green introduce himself as well. But so my background was in that world, and I've ended up here. God's blessed it. We can talk about the university, but we have a very clear mission, and that is we want to prepare Christian leaders to go into places of influence in our culture, to seek out those positions. We're seeing it already with We have a recent graduate who went and graduated at the top of his class at Harvard Law School, and is now out. He's got a biblical worldview, and he's going to make a difference for the kingdom.
That's awesome.
In positions of influence in law and in government. And so that's kind of the mindset. But in every area, whether it's education, whether it's, obviously we started as a pastor training institution, and so biblical truth applied to cultural engagement and to what we call the 7 spheres or the 7 mountains of cultural influence. We have programs to get you into media, to get you into business. In fact, business is our largest program. But we need godly Christian business leaders that are honest and that have a servant leader and
kind of
a generous
Epicurean
mindset.
view of things, right? Going back to Abraham Kuyper, right?
Yeah, that's very much present in our mission
train
and
them,
vision.
right?
Is
the
that,
theology is the top part, but you train them in every aspect,
So-
and wherever God calls you and however
Right.
He's gifted you. Right,
That's
take,
where
take that biblical worldview.
we actually
that form.
talk to students in chapel. We do chapel twice a week, and we talk to them about no matter what you do vocationally, you're in full-time ministry
Amen.
if you're a follower of Christ.
Right.
And whether that's your business or your school or your family, you're a full-time minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that should be the way you view your life, and that what you do vocationally is just a part of that. So that's very much the mindset. All of our students get 18 hours of biblical studies, so they get a minor in biblical studies, no matter whether they're pre-med, pre-law, business, media, whatever their main degree is in, they're all going to get 18 hours of Bible classes. And then our core curriculum is humanities-based, classics-based, the great ideas of Western civilization, fully biblically integrated. So it's very unique, even in Christian college, from a higher ed standpoint. And also, what I tell parents and students when they come is we're looking to find students that want their lives to count for the kingdom. So if you're just looking to kind of coast through college and, I'm a Christian, but, I want to go do this or do that, that's not really the mindset we're looking for. Okay. We're looking for people who want to be leaders, who want to be salt and light in to shine as lights in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, which is what we're dealing with right now, and offer hope to their peers. So that's really what we're about.
That's awesome. Dr. Green, what's your role there?
So I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Arizona Christian. I've been here now for a little bit over a year.
Okay.
It's been a great move. It's good to be back in DFW. It is home for my wife and I, but we're really enjoying Arizona right now, and working with Len and the team there at Arizona Christian. One of the things that so attracted us to the university and to the vision there is, I hope your listeners heard it, is the hope. It's not just cultural criticism. It's a real belief that the gospel can transform lives, and that our society can improve with the gospel, that broken hearts can be mended, and that we can do better than what we're doing right now. And I think sometimes it's easy to get sort of looking out at culture sort of feeling negative or feeling discouraged, but the gospel's powerful. And as we train students to apply that, to use that, and then to go and make disciples and spread God's word, there's really is opportunity for revival. Something President Munsil talks about frequently is that that's a real thing that the Spirit and God can do, and we can be faithful in our service to it.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. I know you guys are looking at the whole idea of gender and sexuality in terms of where does your college stand on that particular issue as a huge cultural issue that's going on right now, right? And you guys want to stay biblical. I'm reading Rosaria Butterfield's 5 Lies, and as she talks about how homosexuality, right, was a lie, where homosexuality is considered normal, transgenderism is considered normal, right? But they do run counter to biblical principles, right? Biblical truth, and that idea that, right, if they're normal, then they don't need to be considered, right, sin. They don't need to be redeemed, right? The blood of Christ doesn't need to cover those things. And the problem with that is you're leaving people stuck in their sin, right? And you guys are looking at saying, no, we want to transform people. We want the gospel of Jesus Christ to move people from where they were in darkness to light, and then to engage the world with that light. So that's where that hope comes from, right?
Absolutely.
It's change lives, change cultures.
And we see it. We actually have a ministry of those type of change lives that is on our campus. But we're very clear on that. I tell people, I actually read them from our statement of faith. which is very clear on biblical sexuality, marriage between a man and a woman.
Begins
but also
in Genesis.
It also every person that works on our campus, so our security guards and the people that clean the offices, the whole community, not just our faculty, not just our staff, but all of our coaches, everyone signs the same statement of faith and the same set of core commitments, which include things like a commitment to the sanctity of life, which include a commitment to marriage between a man and a woman.
Yeah.
And with respect to gender, says very clearly that rejection of one's biological sex is sinful and offensive to God. Yep. So we're very clear on those things. And in fact, it was that clarity that led us into a circumstance in the last year where a local school district that had been using student teachers from Arizona Christian University for 11 years very publicly broke the contract with ACU over our stand on these issues. And of course, as a constitutional lawyer, I knew you couldn't do that. And so with the help of ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, we sued them in federal court, and within 2 months, we had a better deal than we had before. And we had, and they paid the ADF attorneys, so everybody did well. And it was very public. It went national on Fox News and other places that actually demonstrated that at Arizona Christian University, not only do we have these commitments, we believe them, and we're willing to defend them and to defend our students when they're unlawfully, unconstitutionally discriminated against because of their religious beliefs. And so ACU has been very clear on those issues, but we also do it, as you talked about, from a redemptive standpoint. Right. The whole idea is to understand how it is that we flourish as human beings, and it's by obedience to what how God calls us to use our bodies and how to engage in creating families, and that's going to be best for everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Very true. One of the things you talk about in your book is just the idea of where we are from a biblical worldview position. You guys are trying to train a biblical worldview, and so are we. The great thing is we actually have the students when they're younger. And so a lot of people will look at, Barna's on staff with you guys, will look at it and say, hey, worldview is kind of set around the age of 13, right? The whole idea of, is there a God? Is there right and wrong? Where does it all come from? And so, we take that very seriously, that we're training our students, we're training our families, we're training our teachers to make sure that we're going with God's design over man's desire, and we're integrating that biblical worldview. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who call themselves Christians or part of a church, and they don't have a biblical worldview. Yeah. You guys are training in that. We're training in that. What does that look like from as you're a family, as you're a parent? What does that look like in terms of the hope for this next generation? Is that biblical worldview growing and developing, or is it something that we're seeing shrinking still to this day?
So historically, and you mentioned, George Barna, who's the most, the premier biblical worldview researcher in the world, is part of Arizona Christian now. So he's on faculty, he speaks in chapel, but he came to ACU in part because I asked him, can you devise a biblical worldview test that we can give our students to see before they arrive where they're at, and then how they're doing at the end of every year. So we've now had 4 years of a longitudinal study that is very encouraging in terms of what happens to students that come to ACU. By contrast to, if you were giving this test to Christian kids who go to many secular universities, and even sadly some Christian colleges, you would see a decline in their commitment to biblical truth. So we're seeing some really good things from this. But George is with us, and I think you stated it, that there has been a steady decline over 60, 70 years. George has been measuring it for 30 years. And so we've seen, for example, in America, the number of Americans with a biblical worldview has gone from 12% to 4% over the last 30 years.
And that's just kind of like Americans across the board.
That's Americans across the board.
Self-identified as Christians.
But
just
the
as
number
Americans,
of professing Christians is less than 50%.
Right.
It's around 29% of evangelicals, I believe, that have a biblical worldview.
Wow.
And so there's a training process that's not happening effectively right now in the church that we've got to improve on. And so we're doing our part at ACU, but also part of what we're doing through the Cultural Research Center is providing a measurement tool and making it broadly available. In fact, this year, the tool that we use to test our students and the same sort of measurements that we do at the national level to come up with those figures of how many Americans have a biblical worldview, we're going to make available through for K through 12 schools, for churches, for other Christian colleges to be able to measure, so that hopefully everybody can be focused in on how do we. It's essentially discipleship that we're talking about. We're talking about,
and their questions
making
are
disciples.
Do you believe the Bible is true, is the Word of God, right? Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God?
Yeah.
Do you believe he died, was buried, and resurrected? Right? Do you? I mean,
those are basic. Those are the faith questions,
Yep.
but there are other questions that are part of having a comprehensive biblical worldview.
Right.
And part of that is application of biblical truth. Do you believe in reincarnation? Do you believe in that man is basically good?
Right.
And those
Hunger
are
Games.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to throw
Yeah.
that out.
Yeah.
We just saw the most recent Hunger Games, right? And it's about President Snow,
Right.
And in the Hunger Games, the later ones, he's a bad individual. So.
Yeah.
They go back and they go, how does that happen? How does a good person become bad?
Yeah.
Is
We'll
literally
make
what the
choices.
movie's about.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that's
Yeah.
not hard to
Well,
figure
and-
out
and
because
as
you started as bad.
We talk to our students about
Yep.
American exceptionalism, not because of who we are or where we're located or there's anything special about
of the
us,
principles.
but because of the principles and the ideas of our founding.
That's right.
And one of those being the idea of the separation of powers.
Yeah.
Why do you divide power between the federal government and the state government? Why do you have 3 branches of government? It's because we know man is fallen,
Yeah.
and so we can't just entrust one person with all the power because it's not going to go well.
Which our framers got from Isaiah 33:22.
For the Lord
Right.
is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us.
Yeah.
So the governing attributes of God are actually...
Yep, he can hold them together, but you can't
Are
have the three of us
actually-
do it, right?
right.
Because our own selfish interest, right? That's what our framers put together and said, hey, listen, right? Only God
It
can hold
needs-
those 3.
God can hold them, but we're going to
But we
divide
gotta
them
set- and then
in
the
our
whole idea of
government.
federalism, and as we move into a political season,
Yeah.
Yep.
right, these are really important things for us to understand. That if you hold a biblical worldview, it will flesh itself out in the way that you look at politics and the way that you
course.
want human flourishing to be about and what you protect, right? Individual responsibility and freedom, right? And that what do you want the government to do? Sanctity of life, what do we want to protect? The borders, right? You're a border state,
Yeah.
we're a border state. What do we believe about our role and responsibility as a state, as a country, in dealing with, right, people who want to come and have those particular freedoms?
Well,
but
and
what is
even
our, what is our
understanding
role of protecting
what
that?
the Bible teaches about it with respect to the role of governments and states versus our as individual Christians
Right.
and the compassion that we have. That doesn't mean I tell people if you're concerned about justice, the idea that people that have lawfully followed the laws of our country and their country and are waiting to come to the United States legally,
Yep.
and then to reward those that that disobeyed the governing authorities under Romans, and say we're going to put you in a better position or posture than those that are following the law. Is a huge violation of justice. So yes, the Bible speaks to that, and we don't always interpret it correctly because we can get focused sometimes on one verse as opposed to and not understanding the role of government versus the role of individuals. You had asked a question before, but I wanted Dr. Green to speak to how we do biblical worldview integration, and we were also talking about the
Yes.
liberal arts and
Yes.
the significance in
So
this
important.
culture of the liberal arts and the idea of teaching students to be able to think clearly, to write, to communicate well, which leads to success in any arena.
Yeah.
Whatever you end up doing, that's a critical component.
Yeah.
So maybe,
Yeah.
Jeff, if you would speak to that.
No, so as we talked about, we have 18 hours of Bible, but the important thing to realize is that that's not separate from the rest of the curriculum.
Right.
Sometimes you can get this attitude as a Christian as I'm going to do my Bible study and then go do the rest of my life.
Right.
But what we really try to intentionally do is take what you learned in those 18 hours and weave them through the rest of the curriculum so that every class has biblical worldview. It's anticipating that you did learn the materials in the other classes, and so you're getting it reinforced and tested and then applied. Whether or not you're doing music or biology or who knows what. Whatever class you're in, we're able to take biblical worldview and biblical literacy and apply it to those disciplines. Really, it's practice for life. Is learning Scripture and then working it out in your career and your calling.
Yeah.
We also have a liberal arts curriculum, as it's mentioned. It's not such that you go do like one history class over here, then maybe go do a philosophy class over there or whatever, then go choose. We have an integrated humanities curriculum that's interdisciplinary. So when you're in a class, I just finished teaching our sophomore level humanities class. We're talking about great Greek plays in the context of Plato, but then also looking at Greek and Roman art, and then thinking about Roman government and how all these things fit together.
Yep.
And that's so important, too, in the academic world, because otherwise you get a sense of, what I'm doing in the history class again doesn't apply to something else. And from my point of view, from sort of a big picture academic point of view, that helps us tell a coherent narrative to the students so they understand that knowledge isn't just sort of like what you're picking and choosing sort of from a buffet, but we actually have the story of Western civilization. And it's a story worth telling. And there's stories, of course, across the globe that we need to tell, but we need to tell them in an integrated way, with coherence that makes sense, that not only allow the students to learn better, but allow them to understand, well, how did we get here? Good and bad. What's our past as a nation, and how does it interact with other nations?
Yeah, so important, so important. I'm glad one of the things that our school does is a capstone project for our seniors. They get to pick a book, right? Then they have to look at it from a philosophical level, a historical level, and then a biblical concept. And they weave all those together, and it's amazing how, all the way through as you're starting in pre-K with that biblical worldview, and it comes into that, that at the very end, kind of like, okay, do you see how it all works together? What this is supposed to look like? And it's like, oh, like it finally makes sense. And that's the point, right? As you go out into the world, right? You're not doing Bible study over here on the side.
Right.
You're actually taking the wisdom of the Word and applying it to every facet of life.
Right.
And then you're taking your particular skill set and as God has gifted you and saying, okay, well then how does it apply to how I'm going to do my work, right? Run my business, do engineering, whatever that is, run my family, right? There isn't any facet of life that the wisdom that God gives us isn't being applied to. And I think that's just such an important, concept that I think a lot of Christians miss, right? Is that we don't want these two worlds separated. We want the wisdom of God and His Word, right, to infiltrate every aspect of what we do. And I'm glad you guys are doing that at the university level, right? We're trying to do it here at the, elementary, junior high, high school level, and making sure that these students understand how important this role is. And I think that's what our parents are here for, right? That's what they want. I can learn reading, writing, and arithmetic at another school for free, right? But can I understand how that applies and the Word of God integrates into it every facet, along the way? And so it's not just, that we add chapel to what we do.
No.
Right?
It's so much more than
biblical
that. It's got to be
comprehensive, integrated in every aspect
and
of
that's
what's going on.
Our whole university, it's been dubbed by, actually out of the athletics program, Transformation U, because it's all about, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So our students are surrounded by coaches, by faculty members, by staff members who know them, who know their story, who pour into them because they want to see them grow as followers of Christ so that when they leave our institution, they're prepared to be leaders, to draw their peers who are desperately anxious and struggling to the hope of the gospel. And so that's what we're looking for our students to do. We want them to be difference makers.
Well, here's the deal. For our parents, right? You guys are parents, raising kids. What's the word that you would give to parents now? Because I know you're dealing with college kids, right? But think about parents with the younger kids. What would be the word of encouragement, the word of challenge that you would give to those younger parents, right? They've got kids in kindergarten, first and second grade.
I appreciate that. First of all, I would encourage them to pick up Raising Spiritual Champions, which is just published by Arizona Christian University Press. My wife, Dr. Tracy Munsil, is the publisher of ACU Press and the director of the Cultural Research Center, working with George Barna. But it's George's latest book. It's an Amazon bestseller. But it's what does the data tell us is the best way to get biblical worldview to stick in your children under the age of 13. Important. So it's got a lot of research data and a lot of guidance on what are the things that we need to be pouring into our young children in order to give them a foundation in biblical truth that will hold through the many challenges of life. So that would be a very strong recommendation, but also recognize that everything you're doing, that biblical worldview begins to form at about 15 months. So already, infants are seeing things and learning things that will shape the way that they view the world. And so, again, all the data is in this book. Strongly recommend that you take a look. If you have children, grandchildren that you want to influence toward the truth.
Well, we'll do a parent book study on this. and then do a parent podcast. So I'll get some parents to
fantastic.
read it, digest it, and we'll do it again. So that's awesome. Dr. Green,
That's
any
great.
words of encouragement?
Yeah, I would just encourage parents, don't get discouraged by the up and down of the day-to-day in terms of biblical worldview.
Yep.
It's, our children are going to go through processes where they're trying to digest the culture around them, trying to figure out what that looks like.
Yep.
Trust the Lord in His faithfulness. That word isn't going to go out empty. It's going to have an effect. The Spirit's going to work in students. I say the same thing to professors. Some professors can get discouraged and say, gosh, are the students or this or that or whatever, but we need to be faithful. And in that faithful and in that stewardship of our time with them, I really do believe that the Lord, that pays dividends, and that as we as adults, reflect on our lives and realize all the people that have poured in and how it's formed our character, the same is true for our students. So, they might be having a bad week where they aren't sure about this whole Christianity thing, but that's okay.
Some of these issues that our kids are wrestling with are very complex and very difficult.
They're complex.
They are.
They really
they're common
are. And,
in the culture.
Yeah, and it needs to start at a very young age.
Right.
Training and talking about this from a biblical perspective, but we also need to realize it's not a short fast little race. It's a marathon. It's a life that we're trying to train our kids for.
And to Jeff's point, I think he's exactly right. It's a journey that all of us go on, and there are going to be times that we don't look as good. I think we can say that about all of us in our own lives, and I think one of the hardest things that I would say to parents is, especially we homeschooled, we poured biblical truth into our kids, but the reality is that our kids get the same free will that we got. So they ultimately have to choose. And what we can do is best give them truth in a loving context, but they're going to go through seasons, and we've certainly seen it at ACU with students who have struggled at various points, and maybe even when they left the institution weren't where they needed to be, and they come back years later and they thank everybody, and they have big hugs for faculty and for coaches who poured into them and say, I'm walking closely with God now because of what you did 5 years ago, and even though I gave you grief at the time. So we see that, but recognize it's a journey, and that they do get to choose. So what we can do is give them truth and pour into them, but ultimately our kids are going to have to decide for themselves if they're going to follow Christ or if they're going to follow the ways of the world. Yeah.
Well, I am thrilled that you're at Arizona Christian University, that you're doing the job that you're doing, the work that you're doing. It's fun how God prepared you, right, for that. I'll step in, and 12 years later you're still there. But thank you, right? Yeah. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for creating, right, an environment where young people can go and they can wrestle with the great ideas of life, right? Allow the Bible to be that guidebook as they navigate through. And then the idea is that, it's not just here's the ideas, but go live it, go do something.
Yep.
Go be an effective part of your community and change the world around you and change the lives of the people who are there. That
is absolutely the vision, and our students embrace it. I'm always encouraged when I hear them talking about transforming culture with truth and how they want to be difference makers. That's the goal.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys' time. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit with our parents.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for investing the time to listen to this episode of The Journey. Please take a minute to share with friends and family who will also benefit from this valuable resource. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast app. It is truly our blessing and honor to walk with you on The Journey.